And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is January 16th. Most interesting date. It's the 16th day of the year. And of course, there are 349 days remaining until this year is over with. It is National Fig Newton Day, the National Hot and Spicy Food Day, Washing of Bonfim. Now that's also known as the Feast of Bonfim. It's a celebration in Salvador, Brazil. People gather at the Bonfim Church, where locals and visitors alike take part in a procession. This event centers around the symbolic washing of the church steps with water, scented with flowers, of course, creating a colorful and joyful atmosphere. Women dressed in traditional white lace dresses carry out this ritual. Their movements are said to be graceful and rhythmic, echoing a deep connection to faith and tradition. And, of course, this day holds special significance for the people of Bahia. It blends religious, devotional, cultural pride. The mix of Catholic and African traditions adds depth to the event. And you need to dress the part and join the procession. Take part in the washing, grab a bucket, and help wash the church steps. And then there's the later Feast of Bonfim. It's also National Quinoa Day. It offers all the sorts of nutritional benefits for those of you who are health conscious. And a National Rooibos Day, a aromatic brew from South Africa. National Good Team Day. National Religious Freedom Day, Women's Healthy Weight Day, National Appreciate a Dragon Day, National Without a Scalpel Day, National Nothing Day. Take a break from all the activities to just sit. National Mocktail Week, Road Safety Week in India, International Snowmobile Safety Week, National Pizza Week, and Week of Prayer for Christian Unity. Famous people born in the state: Alia, Lin-Manuel Miranda. January 16th is part of January. Start the year out with a dedication to a rather unique and versatile spirit. Dry January. Then there's Manuary. Embrace your lumberjack. National Blood Donor Month, Veganary, Thyroid Awareness Month, National Birth Defects Awareness Month, Cervical Cancer Awareness Month, National Slow Cooking Month, Bread Machine Baking Month, National Clean Up Your Computer Month, and I do not mean hose it down, I mean clean out the old files you don't need anymore. And a National Brain Teaser Month, National Be On Purpose Month, National Clean Up Your IRS Act Month, National Skating Month, National Soup Month, Fresh Florida Tomato Month, National CBD Month, Apple and Apricot Month, National Hobby Month, National Oatmeal Month, National Bath Safety Month, Clap for Health Month, National Poverty in America Awareness Month, and there is a lot of it, folks. National Black Diamond Month, Get a Balanced Life Month, Get Organized Month, and a National Creativity Month, Celebration of Life Month, National Be Kind to Food Servers Month, and National Hot Tea Month. Well, all that having been said, of course, we're going to do our little history segment. In 1458 BC, on this date, Hatshepsut dies at the age of 50 and is buried in the Valley of the Kings. Hatshepsut was the great royal wife of Pharaoh Thutmose II, and actually the sixth pharaoh of the 18th dynasty of Egypt. She ruled first as a regent and then as queen regent until 1458 BC. She was Egypt's second confirmed woman who ruled in her own right. The first one was during the 12th dynasty. So be Pharaoh. She was a daughter of Thutmose I and the great royal wife, Amos. When her husband and half-brother Thutmose II died, she stepped into the breach. In 27 BC, Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus is granted the title Augustus by the Roman Senate. This marked the beginning of the Roman Empire. 378 AD, General Siage conquers Tikal, enlarging the domain of King Spear-thrower Owl of Teotihuacan. In 550 AD, the Gothic War. The Ostrogoths under King Totila conquer Rome after a long siege. They bribed the Isaurian garrison to just open the gates and let them in. It was Isauria, if you're not familiar with, was a rugged, isolated district in the interior of Asia Minor. A very different extent at different periods. The Isaurians were fiercely independent mountain people. They marauded and created havoc in neighboring districts under Macedonian and Roman occupations. Their people hired out as mercenaries. And that's how they came to be the garrison of Rome. In 929, Emir Abd al-Rahman III establishes the Caliphate of Cordoba. 1120, the Crusades. The Council of Nablus is held, establishing the earliest surviving written laws of the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem. When Jerusalem was conquered during the First Crusade, the Crusaders built a kingdom around it. And in fact, there is still the King of Jerusalem as a hereditary title. In 1275, Edward I permits his mother, Eleanor of Provence, to expel the Jews from the towns Worcester, Marlborough, Cambridge, and Gloucester. 1362, St. Marcellus' flood kills at least 25,000 people on the shores of the North Sea. 1537, by God's Rebellion, an armed insurrection attempting to resist the English Reformation begins on this date. 1547, Grand Duke Ivan IV of Muscovy becomes the first Tsar of Russia, replacing the 264-year-old Grand Duchy of Moscow with the Tsardom of Russia. 1556, Philip II becomes King of Spain. 1572, Thomas Howard, the 4th Duke of Norfolk, is tried and found guilty of treason for his part in a Rudolphi plot to restore Catholicism in England. If you're not familiar with it, the Rudolphi plot was a Catholic plot to overthrow Queen Elizabeth I of England and replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots, her cousin. The plot was hatched and planned by Roberto Rudolphi, a international banker who was able to travel between Brussels and Rome and Madrid to gather support without attracting too much attention. The Thomas Howard, the 4th Duke, who I just mentioned, was a Roman Catholic with a Protestant education. He was actually a second cousin of Queen Elizabeth and the wealthiest landowner in the country. He'd been proposed as a possible husband for Mary since her imprisonment in 1568. This, of course, suited Thomas Howard, who was ambitious and felt Elizabeth persistently undervalued him. In pursuit of his goal, he agreed to support the Northern Rebellion, though he chickened out. Norfolk was imprisoned in the Tower of London for 9 months and only freed under house arrest when he confessed everything and begged for mercy. Pope Pius V, in his 1570 papal bull, Regnans in Excelsis, excommunicated the Protestant Elizabeth and permitted all faithful Catholics to do all they could to depose her. The majority of English Catholics ignored the Pope's bull, but in response to it, Elizabeth became much harsher in her treatment of Catholics and their sympathizers. 1605, the first edition of El Ingenioso Hidalgo Don Quixote de la Mancha, Book 1 of Don Quixote by Miguel Cervantes, is published in Madrid, Spain. 1707, the Scottish Parliament ratifies the Act of Union, paving the way for the creation of Great Britain. 1716, King Philip V of Spain promulgates the Nueva Planta decree of the Principality of Catalonia, abolishing the Catalan institutions and its legal system, being replaced by those of the Castile, putting an end to the Catalonia as a separate state, and it became a province of the new French-style Kingdom of Spain. 1757, forces of the Maratha Empire defeat a 5,000-strong army of the Durrani Empire in the Battle of Narela. 1780, American Revolutionary War, Battle of Cape St. Vincent. 1786, Virginia enacts the Statute for Religious Freedom, authored by Thomas Jefferson. 1809, the Peninsula War. The British defeat the French at the Battle of La Coruna. 1847, westward expansion of the U.S. John C. Fremont is appointed governor of the new California Territory. Now, what would he think about it today? 1862, Hartley Colliery disaster. 204 men and boys killed in a mining disaster, which prompted change in UK law that henceforth required all collieries to have at least 2 independent means of escape. 1878, the Russo-Turkish War, Battle of Philippopolis. Captain Alexander Barago, with a squadron of Russian Imperial Army dragoons, liberates Plovdiv from the Ottoman rule. 1883, the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act establishes the U.S. Civil Service. Was enacted by Congress on this date. 1900, the U.S. Senate accepts the Anglo-German Treaty of 1899, in which the U.K. renounces its claim to the Samoan Islands. 1909, Ernest Shackleton's expedition finds the magnetic South Pole. 1913, Indian mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan writes his first letter to G.H. Hardy at Cambridge, stating without proof various formulae involving integrals, infinite series, and continued fractions, beginning a long correspondence between the two, as well as widespread recognition of Ramanujan's results. 1919, Nebraska becomes the 36th state to approve the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. With the necessary 3/4 of the states approving the amendment, prohibition is constitutionally mandated in the U.S. 1 year later. The religious right got what it wanted. No more drinking, which was the best shot in the arm organized crime ever had. Of course, behind closed doors, a lot of those God-fearing people who supported prohibition had their nightly tipple. 1920, the League of Nations holds its first council meeting in Paris, France. 1921, the Marxist left in Slovakia and the Transcarpathian Ukraine holds its founding Congress in Lubechina. 1942, the Holocaust. Nazi Germany begins deporting Jews from the Lodz ghetto to Chomno extermination camp on this date. Also on this date, 1942, the crash of TWA Flight 3 killed all 22 people on board, including film star Carol Lombard. It crashed in New Mexico. It hit, I think, Mount Taylor. It was operated by Transcontinental and Western Air as a scheduled domestic passenger flight. It was supposed to go from New York to Burbank, California, with several stopovers, including Las Vegas, Nevada. January 16th, 1942, at 7:20 in the afternoon, in the evening Pacific time, 15 minutes after takeoff from Las Vegas Airport, the aircraft was destroyed when it crashed into a sheer cliff on Potosi Mountain, 32 miles southwest of the airport. All 22 people on board, including movie star Carol Lombard, her mother, Clark Gable's press agent Otto Winkler, 3 crew members, and 15 U.S. soldiers died in the crash. The Civil Aeronautics Board investigated the accident and determined the cause was a slight navigation error by the captain. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near Potosi Mountain. But, accidents happen. For 1945, World War II, Adolf Hitler moves into his underground bunker, the so-called Fuhrer bunker. In 1959, Australorlinus Airlines Flight 205 crashes into the Atlantic Ocean near Astor Piazzolla International Airport in Mar del Plata, Argentina, killed 51 people. 1969, Czech student Jan Polach commits suicide by self-immolation in Prague, Czechoslovakia. He was protesting the Soviets' crushing of the Prague Spring the year before. And of course, setting yourself on fire in public accomplishes so much. Just no one's ever been able to tell me what. 1969 space race. Soviet spacecraft Soyuz 4 and Soyuz 5 performed the first ever docking of crewed spacecraft in orbit, and the first ever transfer of crew from one space vehicle to another, and the only time such a transfer was accomplished with a spacewalk. 1979 Iranian Revolution. The last Iranian Shah flees Iran with his family for good and relocates to Egypt. He was replaced with the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. And Iran went from the Paris of the Middle East to something I'm not sure how to describe. 1983, Turkish Airlines Flight 158 crashes at Ankara Istanbul Airport in Ankara, Turkey. Killed 47 and injured 20. 1991, coalition forces go to war with Iraq, beginning the Gulf War. 1992, El Salvador officials and rebel leaders signed the Chapultepec Peace Accords in Mexico City, ending the 12-year Salvadoran Civil War that claimed at least 75,000 lives. 1995, an avalanche hits the Icelandic village Suðavik, destroying 25 homes and burying 26 people. 14 of those 26 died. 2001, Second Congo War. Congolese President Laurent Desire Kabila is assassinated by one of his own bodyguards in Kinshasa. Also in 2001, President Bill Clinton awards former President Theodore Roosevelt a posthumous Medal of Honor for his service in the Spanish-American War. I'm not sure what he hoped to accomplish by that, but then again, a lot of Bill Clinton's actions have been a little baffling, which makes it even more puzzling. He's one of my cousins, and we all thought he was pretty well put together. 2002, war in Afghanistan. The UN Security Council unanimously establishes an arms embargo and freezing of assets of Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and the remaining members of the Taliban. Of course, our current administration gave it back to him, with apologies, of course. 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia takes off on mission STS-107, which would be its final one. 16 days later, on re-entry, Columbia disintegrated. 2002, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf is sworn in as Liberia's new president. She becomes Africa's first female elected head of state. 2011, Syrian Civil War. The movement of a democratic society is established with the stated goal of reorganizing Syria along the lines of democratic confederalism. And, of course, it didn't quite work out that way. 2012, the Mali War begins when Tuareg militias start fighting the Malian government for independence. 2016, 33 out of 126 freed hostages are injured and 23 killed in terrorist attacks in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, on a hotel and a nearby restaurant. 2017, Turkish Airlines Flight 6491 crashes into a residential area near Manas International Airport in Kazakhstan, killed 39 people. 2018, Myanmar police opened fire on a group of ethnic Rakhine protesters, killing 7 and wounding 12. 2020, the first impeachment of Donald Trump formally moves into its final phase in the U.S. Senate. Democrats thought they had him. 2020, the U.S. Senate ratifies a U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement as a replacement for NAFTA. The interesting thing is, every time I saw any disagreements under that law, whoever was pointing the fingers at the American businesses usually won. All right, we're going to talk about some news stories. Interestingly enough, FBI has closed its DEI office. DEI, of course, is diversity, equity, and inclusion, which in almost every case I have seen has been literally anti-white in its actions. It's to become effective by December 2024. The FBI didn't say why it closed the office, although a lot of Republicans have been critical of its prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion. They said it overshadowed national security. In fact, Republican Senator Marshall Blackburn sent a letter to FBI Director Christopher Wray claiming the radical DEI practices had endangered Americans following the New Year's Day terrorist attack in New Orleans. This administration, for whatever reason, has gone so far to the left, I'm not sure if they can find a way back. Now, the FBI had a page on diversity and inclusion that's still on its website. It says the agency is committed to cultivating a diverse and inclusive workforce. So we shall see what comes of that. Adam Schiff went after Pam Bondi, Trump's appointee for Attorney General, and he started in on her, and she said, wait a minute, you need to be worried about yourself, because your allegations under the great Russia hoax led to massive expenditures of money on nothing. Well, an Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal was agreed to that President Biden tried to take credit for in his speech yesterday, when even his own Secretary of State said it was President Trump largely responsible for that agreement. Israel's ruling Likud party has criticized the national security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, when he said his party would leave the coalition government if it approved the hostage ceasefire deal with Hamas. There's no question that something's going to have to be done. But the question is, what? Donald Trump has named Sylvester Stallone, Mel Gibson, and John Voight as special ambassadors to Hollywood, since Hollywood does tend to act as if it is a separate country. Well, what happened? There we go. He is moving back into the White House on the 20th. He said they'll serve as special envoys to me for the purpose of bringing Hollywood, which has lost much of its business over the last 4 years to foreign countries, back bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. Now, Democrats showed this week that they learned nothing from the last election. They did their best to embarrass and bring down the nominees and lost in almost every case. Russian man saved an American flag outside a burning California home. He said that he was driving through the wildfires in Altadena and he saw this residence engulfed in flames with an American flag outside. So he said he'd never seen a wildfire and is worried about the city he now calls home. But he wanted to rescue the flag. The View, the program with Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar and their sidekicks have been very anti-Trump, but to their shock, ABC's Martha Raddatz told them in an interview that Trump had an effect on his ceasefire. The Senator Hirono from Hawaii was raked over the coals on social media for a deranged opening confirmation hearing question to Burgum. She asked the same question to the other nominees. She said, "It's part of my responsibilities to ensure the fairness of the fitness of nominees before any other committee on which I sit. I asked the following two initial questions. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal and physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?" Kind of a dumb question. He said he hadn't. Said, "Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?" And he said no. She asked similar questions to the other nominees. But what she overlooks is the Congressional Slush Fund that is there to make payoffs to the partners of members of Congress. Let's see. Newsom has finally woken up and realized there's an issue, and he's called for heftier penalties for looting amid wildfire devastation. You know, it's only recently that crime has become illegal in the state of California. Trump transition team has asked 3 State Department officials to resign. 3 senior career diplomats have stepped down from their roles. Derek Hogan, Marcia Bernacat, Elena Teplitz. They were asked to leave their roles. They oversee the State Department's workforce and internal coordination. So apparently there's going to be major changes made by the incoming administration. Anti-Trump columnist George Wills has torn into the what he calls the failed Biden presidency. He said no prior president has used mass communications more insultingly to war Americans than did President Biden. Now, he's been an anti-Trump columnist for the Washington Post the last 8 years. He offered a scathing assessment of President Biden's failed presidency. He said Biden's failed presidency ending with a blizzard of decisions that validate voters' rejection of his vice president, who, when asked, couldn't even think of a single flaw in his record. Remember, his vice president was the border czar, who couldn't find the border. There is well, Joe Biden has had a meltdown and attacked Nancy Pelosi. They'd been friends for 50 years. And Pelosi is one of the leaders of the Dump Biden campaign. Former Bob Uecker, legendary baseball broadcaster, just died at the age of 90. He was known as Mr. Baseball. The Texas's illegal immigration crackdown has produced nearly 50,000 criminal arrests. And the Biden Justice Department is doing their best to try to get him out of jail. Well, I think that is pretty much taking care of our history and news. I only added a news segment recently because there is so much going on. And a lot of it is not broadcast. It's not in the paper. There's just a lot of it is done in secret because the powers that be know that the American voter are not in favor of these things. Well, today's show is going to be talking about the ghost of World War II. There's been a lot of phenomena in the European Pacific theaters and a lot of historical locations in the U.S. where the spirits of the dead seem unable to rest. There's some of the stories people tell that is absolutely mind-boggling. You know, even through the dark days of World War I, the so-called war to end all wars was just a shadow in the past. The world was really not prepared for the carnage and ferocity and genocidal terror of World War II. Fields of Europe were barely recovering from the last war's wounds, only to be torn up even worse. D-Day, Iwo Jima, Stalingrad, Battle of the Bulge. These were major events that resulted in a lot of loss of life. Well, you know, if there's any World War II battlefield that deserves to be haunted, it's the beaches of Normandy. Isolated stretch in northern France where hundreds of thousands of Allied troops stormed June 6, 1944, and where tens of thousands of troops on both sides remained. You know, since the invasion, there have been reports of paranormal phenomena associated with those beaches, just as regularly as the waves that once propelled the landing craft onto the shores decades ago. So too do the stories come. First story that came to my attention involved a little girl. she and her family, who were history buffs, went to look at some of the bunkers and pillboxes you can still find on Omaha Beach, which was said to be the bloodiest sector of the invasion. They started at the bunkers of Point du Hoc, one of the many shows of Allied heroism during D-Day. A group of American Rangers stormed the cliffside complex that served as an anchor for the German defenses. The fortress served as the epitome of German General Erwin Rommel's defensive genius in building the Nazis' Atlantic Wall. It was to defend against just such a type of incursion that Allied generals had planned. And according to the little girl's father, their trip started out fairly typical, and his daughter didn't seem to experience anything weird during their initial explorations of bunkers and old blown-up stuff, as she called it. At least she didn't tell her father what she'd seen while she toured the beach. But later on, after they had left, she started to tell her father while touring the bunker she had seen men. Said some of them were armed and pointed their weapons at her. Others lay on the bunker floor or crouched in the corners. Now, of course, her father recognized this might just be the old active imagination of a 7-year-old and didn't press her regarding these visions. But about a year later, his curiosity got the better of him, and he started to interview her. He assured members of the forum that prior to the visit and the year after the visit, his daughter had no exposure to his military history fascination. In fact, he didn't discuss military history at home. Didn't show her pictures. Didn't show her any movies from World War II. And he said one thing he wanted to point out when he was discussing this later with his colleagues. His daughter had never seen what a German soldier looks like or the weapons they carried. He said he didn't have any pictures of them, nor in his house is there anything she could relate to look at them. And when he plays any World War II computer games, she's not allowed to watch him or be in the room with him. That's his wife's idea, don't you know? So she had no exposure whatsoever from which she could have generated her stories. So he began to ask his daughter about her experience at the beach. She asked what the men looked like. She began to describe the soldiers' uniforms, which she said were gray or dark green. She said the men wore helmets that were darker than the uniforms. And her description does fit the historical accounts of the soldiers who would have fought at the site decades prior, according to the father. She also mentioned badges and emblems on the uniforms that matched descriptions of the ones that appeared on the uniforms of the World War II soldiers. Well, of course, her father still wasn't convinced. He asked her for more proof that she'd actually seen something. He asked her to draw some stuff and try to see what she saw in her head. And he said later on what she drew scared the hell out of him. Father explained his daughter drew a near-perfect rendition of an MP-40, also called a Smizer, a German submachine gun, or you might call it a machine pistol used by some German troops in World War II. She proceeded to reliably reproduce pictures of German helmets and the tunics the German soldiers wore at about the time of the D-Day invasion. Well, I guess you could say as a follow-up, he took her to the library, and he pulled out a book on World War II uniforms and weaponry. And he put it in front of his daughter, and she was about 8 or 9 at the time. Without any prompting, she began to point out the items she had seen on the haunted beach. In a cluster of weapons used during World War II, she specifically pointed out the MP-40 that she had described earlier. Well, that finally convinced her father she had actually seen something. He concluded there was nothing else he could think, but everything she said and saw was 100% true. Well, this girl's run in with the spirits of Normandy, and the only case of supernatural remains left on the beach of Normandy that people talk about. Another witness, young lady, said that she also had a hand-to-hand encounter with one of the battlefield ghosts. And her story seems to confirm the young girl's impression of a brutal battle that left more reminders than just craters and ruins of cliffside fortifications. Also left reminders through the restless dead that continue to march through the sands and look over the rock formations of Normandy. Her story began on a trip to France with a group of friends, like the father and daughter and I just finished talking about. The love of history and respect for the warriors who fought and died there drew them to Point du Hoc. From the beach, they noted they could still see the remains of German bunkers and holes where bombs from Allied boats and planes had pummeled the emplacements. She and one other friend decided that a view from the beach didn't satisfy their curiosity enough. They said they couldn't explain it, but it was like some force pulled them off the beach and maybe a little bit into the past, the remains of the chaotic first day of the D-Day invasion. They had no idea what or who the source of that force might be, but they began to get an inkling. According to the account they wrote, the last bunker they entered that morning had a strange vibration. There were no interior lights, like some of the other fortifications that allowed tourists and history buffs to explore the sites in depth. Just a bit of light trickling, and as the curious duo entered the bunker, the rest of the bunker was so dark that the young lady advised her friend to leave the bunker, find some straw and twigs, and fashion a torch. I guess I never heard about flashlights. While she waited, she heard noises coming from deep within the fortress. Like any good ranger climbing Point du Hoc, she did what she had to do. She went in after whatever that sound was. And as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw something coming at her. A shadow was sweeping across the floor of the bunker and approaching her. And as it got closer, she made out what she was sure was a human form. She was shocked, but managed to call out for her friend. The shadow, which she could, as he got closer, could confirm was a human with a hat, started to approach her and stopped. She watched as a figure stood near the center of the chamber before it finally began to move back into the dark section of the room where it vanished. She said, after that, I now believe that the ghosts of dead soldiers do occupy these bunkers. Well, other visitors managed to bring back more than just stories. They bring back evidence, photographs, snippets of electronic voice phenomena from their tours of the famous battlefield. One man and his brother visited cemeteries and other historic spots before visiting Point du Hoc. And he and his other friends made what you might refer to as camera-happy tours of the bunkers that other experiencers, I guess you could call them, visited. Now, in this particular case, the witnesses didn't see or detect anything out of the ordinary, at least while they were physically at the site, that is. It's when they left France the next day that they got a supernatural shock. Man decided to flip through the photos he had snapped during their trip to Normandy. As he scanned through, he found an image that he took of his brother that gave both of them the heebie-jeebies. It seemed to show a white, somewhat transparent but solid figure coming out of the wall of the bunker in front of the man's brother. Now, of course, skeptics will point out this is a camera malfunction, but the rest of the photos didn't have any anomalies. The photographer added that the image was definitely not in the viewfinder when he snapped the picture. There was a newly wedded husband said he and his wife were honeymooning on Omaha Beach, which is a strange place for a honeymoon, I have to say. Before he called that the most pathetically unromantic honeymoon ever, the husband pointed out his wife also got her trip to Paris. First, he decided to explore the decaying bunkers on Omaha Beach. Took out his phone camera and began to snap pictures of the bunkers and the fortification's interior. Like other World War II explorers we're going to have talked about and are going to talk about, he said that some force kept pulling him deeper into the bunker. Without electric lights, even cracks in the wall to let the sunlight in, the room was absolutely pitch black. Took a few steps and turned to the left, feeling well down that long empty corridor, or at least a corridor he thought was empty. Eventually, he decided to take a couple of quick pictures with his flash, and that action took care of two of his needs. Shone some immediate light in the bunker, and he could check out the photos later. Well, as the flash popped off like tiny versions of ordnance that exploded over Omaha Beach during the invasion, he didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. And during those short bursts of light, he didn't see anybody in the corridor with him. And after his little tour, he took his wife for her trip to Paris. Well, as they settled in for the evening, they began to review photographs from Omaha Beach. Immediately noticed something strange about the photos from the bunker. In one of the window-type areas, they could clearly see the image of a face. Both the husband and the wife described the look on the ghost's face as chilling. Well, if you believe in ghosts or not, it's irrelevant, because the ghosts apparently have a need to interact with humans. On the morning of in August 1942, a group of commandos stormed onto the French beach near Deep, right into the blistering, deadly, accurate gun and artillery fire from well-trained, experienced German soldiers and Kriegsmarines who'd been made aware there was going to be a raid. Now, losing the element of surprise, this attack turned into a bloodbath that took the lives of 2,500 Allied forces and resulted in thousands more being captured or wounded. If you look at a list of battles and raids during World War II, the Deep Raid, which was known as Operation Jubilee, typically rates as a mere footnote in the history books. Ill-fated tests that failed to do anything except add a few lessons learned to the Allied commanders who were planning for D-Day. You might say it's just an echo, overcome by the thunder of bigger and more successful amphibious operations during the war, such as the Normandy invasion. But whatever you might have heard about Operation Jubilee, the historic actions of those commandos on an August morning are apparently so powerful you can still bear witness to the echoes of the Deep Raid on that French beach. That's according to several people who claim they had supernatural experiences at the site of the former battle. It was almost 10 years after the battle when a group of families, 2 English women, their children, and a nurse were vacationing near the site of the raid. In fact, the family stayed in a house that German officers once occupied. And the view from the house offered a perfect vista to the beach where some of the fiercest fighting took place. Now, for the first few days of their stay, everything was uneventful. Then on the morning of August 4th, just a couple of weeks before the anniversary of the battle, their vacation house shook from its slumberness. According to some occult experts, the house quite possibly shook from the very foundation of reality. According to the ladies, he woke up to the unmistakable sounds of a violent battle. Sounds of machine guns and the booms of cannons echoed in the early dawn skies. Women could hear people screaming and yelling out commands. They jumped out of their beds and ran to the balcony expecting to see all hell breaking loose, but it was still dark. They didn't see anything. No men barking orders, no guns, nothing. And, stranger still, the other members of the family didn't wake up. They were still in bed. Well, as the shouts and noises faded, the women decided to go back to bed and try to figure out what had happened. Then the battle sounds rose again, and as quickly faded. In fact, over the next hour or so, the strange sounds literally undulated, reached a peak shortly before dawn. And it wasn't just the sea and the shore that seemed to be alive. The sky is filled with phantoms as well. They could hear dive bombers strafing the beach and other aircraft rumbling overhead. That's something interesting to wake up to. Well, during the morning's events, the ladies started to take notes and mark down the timing of the sounds. Later on, they created full-blown reports for the British Society for Psychical Research, and they investigated the claims. Strangely enough, the diary of events matched the deep operation almost perfectly. Even the aircraft noise corresponded to the late arrival of British airplanes during the battle. And the booming artillery also matched the time that destroyers began peppering the beach with artillery fire. And unless these women had expert knowledge of the battle, or they had a detailed history of the raid, and you have to remember this was pre-internet, there's little chance they could have just guessed the precise timeline of the battle. In fact, the official account of the deep raid, which had been censored and would contain the timing of the battle, wasn't published till several months after the women had their experience. Most occult experts, including several members of the society, believe the women had a genuine supernatural encounter on this famous, now infamously haunted World War II battlefield. Well, even today, decades after the war raged across the western front of World War II, evidence of the destruction that rained down on the land is still visible. There are pockmarked fields, shattered walls, piles of rubble. And that's just some of the physical remains of the war. Now, for a number of ghost hunters, though, it's the spiritual remains that fascinate him and his group of paranormal investigators. In 2001, he made the comment, ghost hunting isn't a hobby for him, it's like a life task. His interest in the field didn't come from an encounter on the battlefield, but from an experience he had at an aunt's house in Echternach, Luxembourg, when he was about 12. Now, his name was Tom Padal. He helps lead a paranormal investigative team from Wuppertal, North Rhine-Westphalia. He said, we heard footsteps and doors open and closed. Some years later, his parents told him that when the soul workers were digging in the soil, they found a skeleton, which they thought might be the reason for the haunting. He and Cludy Winterkamp, who's both his life partner and afterlife investigative partner, had several encounters with the supernatural, which prompted their desire to find evidence of ghosts in Europe, including the spirit activities of the region's World War II battlefields. Once, for example, I was living in a flat. The couple heard strange noises coming from the storage area. So they walked down to check. Of course, nobody was there. A few nights later, though, Cludy did see something odd. She said she saw a ball of fog about 30 or 40 centimeters in diameter, and it just appeared in front of her. And after that, a whole list of paranormal activity started to occur. They saw human-shaped shadows and heard noises, noticed doors that opened and closed on their own. And it wasn't just the humans in their apartment that witnessed the activity. Animals are often sensitive to supernatural forces, and the couple's cats began to act and react oddly. Well, historians say the Battle of the Bulge was a desperate last counteroffensive by Hitler's army. With the Russians blasting through the eastern front and the American and English forces squeezing in on the western front, Hitler gambled when he threw everything left in the German war machine at the Americans, taking strategic advantage of a bulge that had developed in the quiet section of their front. They actually hoped to take the Americans by surprise, make a quick thrust forward to the sea, and scatter the Allied supply lines. And it almost worked. But the American forces were more tenacious than the Germans had assumed, and General Patton proved to be far quicker in an effort to relieve the troops at the Bulge. Miraculously, the weather turned favorable for the Allies, allowing the once grounded fighters and bombers to fly missions against the German forces in the area. Well, this paranormal investigative group, led by Tom, with Cludy's assistance, investigated several sections of the Bulge battlefield at least 4 times. They have plans for more research in the area because that site is that active. They guess that Hasselpath might be one of the haunted places because much of the action swirled around the area. When the battle began, German troops made Hasselpath one of their primary objectives, which turned the area into a bloodbath. At the first fight, the onslaught of German army and infantry forced the Americans to retreat and take new defensive positions on the next ridge. So the Germans used the Hasselpath corridor as a staging area for further attacks on the American lines. Unfortunately for the Germans, it didn't succeed. So those attacks grew more desperate, more fierce, more violent. The dead and the wounded piled up. According to Tom, the team collected evidence that some of the spares are still on the battlefield. One of the things I've heard is that when people die unexpectedly, often they don't know they're dead. They keep redoing the same activity over and over and over. But I want to remind you once again that one of the things that I've discovered, or my wife introduced me to, I should say, is cheesecake. And Just Cheesecake Outlet, 404 Arizona here in El Paso. They got a cheesecake. You'll walk a long way to get one. Of course, my wife also makes the best pumpkin pie I've ever put in my mouth. In fact, I detested pumpkin pie until she made one for me her way. So I suggest that. Also, one other thing that's been pointed out that I need to make mention of. Blog Talk Radio, which has been my platform for 10 years, at least, is no longer going to be broadcasting as of the end of this month. So I moved to Podbean. And with the assistance of Podbean, I've moved to a large number of other sites. You can find my show on quite a number of locations. You can also go to Amazon. Look under books, look up Ken Hudnall, and you'll see a picture of me. And you click on that picture, and that will take you to a lot of my shows. When the transfer of my shows from Blog Talk to Podbean took place, 1,498 shows moved. I didn't realize I'd done that many. But I'd be interested in hearing what you think about it. We'll have a podcast-related website up shortly. And we're going to also be moving into videos. So, just keep listening. I appreciate it. Till tomorrow at this time, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.